I heard a word today that I have not heard used very much. The word is unstoppability. Online, the definition is incapable of being stopped. My guest today, Dave Letterfly, is using his unstoppability in so many aspects of his life. Dave is an artist, author, public speaker, horse trainer, and spent years in the circus. This episode is a great way to kick off 2025. Get ready for adventure with Dave Letterfly. And if you start to feel lonely, get a postcard and send it to someone you know. Just a little trick from Dave. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back to the show. My name is Jake Bushman, and I'm the host of Journey with Jake. 3 years. I can't believe it. I've been hosting this show for 3 years now, and in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm just getting started. A couple of things to note with the new year. First, I'm going to be starting a monthly newsletter, maybe not monthly, maybe a little more than that. I'm not 100% sure yet. Look at my show notes and my website, journeywithjake.net, for a link to sign up to receive the newsletter. The newsletter will focus on my guests from the past month, take a look at my guests coming up, and will also give you a little glimpse into who I am just a little bit more. The other big news for 2025 is I am part of Sacred Spaces Volume 3. The official title of the book is Sacred Spaces, Subtle Shifts for Mind, Body, and Home Transformation. I am one of the 20 plus authors who were asked to participate, and it gave me an opportunity to share my story really about how Journey with Jake came about. It was a great opportunity, and I want everyone to check it out. The book comes out on February 18th. Be sure and follow me on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast, as I will continue to have updates about the book on social media. I also added a link in the show notes that allows you to get more information as we get closer to the release of Sacred Spaces Volume 3. I'm excited about it. It's something I've never done before, so it tested me in a lot of ways, and I'm grateful for that. Speaking of being tested, my guest today, Dave Letterfly, was tested growing up and found his way forward through the circus, horsemanship, and art. From overcoming alcoholism and social anxiety, Dave's story is one with a lot of lessons. If you like this episode, you will also enjoy episode 107 with Amber Payroddy about her adventures as a photographer, and in particular, photography for couples who are eloping. Great stuff with Amber. Okay, let's get to my fascinating conversation with Dave Letterfly. All right, I'm excited. Today I have Dave Letterfly on the show with me. Dave, welcome to Journey with Jake.
Hey, thank you, Jake. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. This is fun for me. I looked at kind of who you are, all kinds of people. I mean, you're one person, but you do all kinds of things. You've got this interesting life that you've lived, the things that you've done. You're an artist, you've been in the circus. We're going to kind of hit on all those things. So as we get going, I always like to start by knowing a little bit about your background and who you are. And this will probably just lead us kind of right into what we're going to talk about. So Dave, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about who Dave is.
I'll be happy to do that. I grew up in the Midwest, the son of a opera singer and a Lutheran minister, and I fell in love with the circus as a little kid. And the other thing that I grew up with was kind of a frustrating family situation due to my older brother who had a bizarre behavior issue that they didn't have a name for at that time. So I ended up not becoming social. I became productive and creative from the get-go as a child. My career path has been creative, artistic in a lot of areas. It seemed like I've just excelled at whatever I aimed my sights on. I started painting stuff when I was a child, decorative stuff. And I played the drums on the circus, and then fell right in love with interacting with animals. Back in the 70s, the circuses still had plenty of animals around it, and it was a fascinating place for me to learn functional relationship skills that I didn't necessarily have because I was reclusive as a child. And then that grew into yet another passion for classic horsemanship. And the entire time, my painting skills kept maturing, and I was just in the right place at the right time in a series of things that occurred over the decades that that gave me the interesting career that I've enjoyed, that has also taken me all over the country. One of the things that I remember was a quote by Ernest Hemingway, and that was, above all else, a writer needs to live an interesting life. And I have, that was apparently imprinted me, because I've certainly enjoyed the fact that I've gotten to live an interesting life, and I still do. I'm still traveling the country most of the year, and I get to enjoy the winters at my home in Florida.
Wow. Okay. Whole bunch of things here. Guru of an interesting life. I know that kind of says that on like your website and things, that you're the guru of living an interesting life. Let's go back though to that childhood. You said you're kind of reclusive. You didn't socialize much. You're kind of quiet. You had a brother that maybe had some behavioral issues that at the time they didn't know what it was. What was that situation like? Was that just ever since you were born? Was your brother just kind of dominating? Like, what was kind of going on there?
Yeah, he was the focus of the entire family. He commanded the focus. So myself and my little sister were, in essence, almost invisible. So we became productive at the same time we were on the.
Okay, so
And
you were being kind of, what's the word, left out, so to speak. Your brother was dominating all the attention. You and your sister were kind of being left out. So you became productive. When you say you became productive, what do you mean by that? You mean you just started doing tasks? Like, what do you mean by productive?
doing things. Yeah, I remember when I was big enough to see out of the car, I noticed the other vehicles along the road that would go by us all had little pinstripe designs on them. Back in those days, there was lots of hand painted decoration on just about everything. And I remember seeing those designs and having the thought, I could do that. And when I got home, I proceeded to decorate my wagon, and then I'd decorate my bicycle. And then the other kids in the neighborhood would notice what I was doing, and they'd talk me into doing something for them. And so I've never been bored. I've always noticed something, and then launched myself into I guess figuring it out.
So you saw, so they call that pinstriping, right? Is that the type of art that you
Yeah,
saw?
that's what I saw.
What was it about that made you say, "Hey, I want to dive into this," and you just liked it and you're like, "Hey, let me
Oh
try
yeah,
this."
yeah. It was a way to distinguish. It was a little extra. Maybe it was something that was missing in my life, at that point, that I recognized. Say, wow, this is a distinguishing feature. Maybe this will help give me an identity or something. So
Do you remember how old you were roughly when you saw that and decided to start doing that?
probably 4 years old,
Just a little guy.
just a little guy. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure the designs were very crude, as a 4-year old, but that didn't stop me.
Right. You kept going. And the interesting part now is you've made a whole career out of pinstriping and doing other art for sure.
Yeah,
We'll dive into that here in a minute. You said another thing you said too is that you've always loved the circus. And when was this? Back in the 60s as a kid, the circus, the classic, what? Canvas top, 3-ring circus. Is that kind of what you fell in love with?
definitely. We had a 3-ring circus that came to our town every summer. And when I was a tyke, probably about the same age as my mother, took us to the circus. And when we walked on the lot and I saw the tents, the flags flapping, the sounds of the lions roaring, and the talker on the sideshow talking, and the smell of the elephants and the popcorn and the cotton candy all mixed together, my mother leaned down and said, your father would love this. And that's what it took to sell me on the spot. And it just imprinted me with the love that my dad had for the circus. As a boy, he was able to witness the gigantic railroad circuses, that went through the country back in the 30s, when they had hundreds and hundreds of horses that would drag the wagons from the railroad train to the circus grounds. It must have been just an incredible thing to see that. And so he had a special place in his heart for the circus. And as soon as I found out about it, it was like, okay, if it's good enough for my dad, it's good enough for me. Yeah.
So that was a love that your dad had, that you shared the same love of the circus. When did you join the circus?
At 16, by the time I was a teenager, things had become pretty frustrating in our house. With the no solution for the bizarre behavior and plus when you turn into a teenager, everything gets frustrating. So my solution to the frustration at home was to go, screw this, I'm out of here. I'm going to go join the circus. I spent the summer on the circus when I was 16, between my junior and senior years in high school. And then I came back to graduate, and then I hit the road. I went right straight back and hit the road and started going all over the country, having a blast.
Wow. And when you started with the circus, you were a drummer? Is that what you said?
Drummer, but before I ever played the drums for the first time, I painted something. So I guess you could say that my painting inclination showed up first.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so were you painting, like, I don't know, some of their banners and things like that? Is that what you did for the circus?
Decorations on the fleet. Yeah, they always wanted something just to make it a little fancier, even if it was just a star, on just anything. But ticket boxes and the sides of the trucks and little designs in the corners and all kinds of places to put design. So it was really a good place to start, because there was a variety of things that were appropriate to develop.
Very good. And then you played the drums for them, and then you kind of started falling in love with the animals, and especially horses.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. How did you get involved with horses?
I fell right. It seemed like I became just fascinated. There was something going on relationally between the animals and the animal trainers that I noticed and appreciated. And there was probably something that was empty, that was left over from not becoming social, that it addressed that missing element in me. And I just became fascinated with it. And the other people on the circus noticed it and encouraged me. And the next thing you know, I'm probably 3 years on the road. I'm understudying a horse trainer during the wintertime out in Oklahoma, and I'm developing my own 6-pony Liberty Act with his help. And so I ended up having a Liberty Act of 6 ponies on the road for several years. And then that led to having a horse that would lay down and sit up and march and, do all of those kinds of things, which led to the next echelon of the classic horsemanship art form.
Okay, since we're on an audio podcast, I think in my mind, I'm like, okay, 6-pony Liberty Act. Is that basically having like a bunch of like 6 little ponies that you're like directing and moving? Kind of explain that.
Yeah, Liberty Act, it means that they're at liberty. They're completely loose. And we work in a round circus ring. So what the 6 ponies would do would be what's called a precision drill, a routine. They'd go one direction around the ring, then they'd reverse direction, and then reverse again, and then 3 of them would go one direction, 3 would go the other way. Just like a marching band does a whole bunch of different kinds of things. That's what you got 6 ponies doing. They would you'd put a hurdle in front of them, they'd jump the hurdle, and then they'd walk the ring curb with their front feet, and then they'd waltz, and then do a bunch of stuff, and have them rear up at the end, and then come up to the front of the ring for the final bow. I'd jump over the ring curb, and they'd be running right behind me, and they'd mount the curb on the front for our concluding applause and stuff. So yeah, it was a Liberty Act. They're all completely loose, and
Loose, and just Yeah, just
Yeah,
following your commands, basically, right? Just following what you're leading.
definitely. Yeah, it's a yeah routine. They learn as the result of routine. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's awesome. I mean, I picture. Thank you for explaining that too, because I could picture it in my mind, and
Okay.
that's fantastic to kind of picture that. And I know a lot of circus is kind of going by the wayside, especially with animal acts, things like that, unfortunately. And as a kid, I remember going to a under the canvas 3-ring circus act and seeing those
Oh,
animals doing their thing. And so thank you for painting that picture, because that's kind of fun for me even to kind of relive that. So you
it's great.
had the pony act. You also said then you had a horse that you started that would lay down and do different tricks and things as well.
My first horse was what's called a manage horse, and they would do like the poses, and this was an entry level performing horse that most people could manage, thus the name, the manage horse. And they would lay down, sit up, and march, and do the 3 step, and walk sideways, and rear, and do all those kinds of things. That was my first horse, and then as the result of being a student of classic horsemanship, by the time I got to my second horse, that was what we call a high school horse, which is a horse that's schooled to the highest level. And those horses produce movements instead of poses. They would certainly march and do the 3 step, but included is the passage, which is the slow elevated trot, and the piaffe, which is a trot in place, and the canter on 3 legs, and the stuff, the movements that are more advanced. It takes longer to train the rider than it does the horse with the
Interesting.
high school stuff. And then the third horse, which I started in the middle 80s, I took him all the way from taking him off the pasture with his mother through just every bit of the training. And I had a whole series of mentors by this time. And because I was traveling the country, I had the ability to go seek out somebody I wanted to learn something from, and go there and study with them. And as the result, I took that horse all the way to the top and won best domestic animal act at the international circus. It's like a talent uh, show that they had in Sarasota every year, and so I got the best of show in 1990, probably 94 or something, somewhere in the middle 90s as the result. And I did all the work on that horse.
Wow.
Yeah,
Throughout this career of being in the circus, and I imagine you're still working with your art and things like that. The social aspect for you, because I know you said you were pretty reclusive, weren't very social. Was that helping your social part of it? Become more social? Was this stuff kind of
it
gearing you
really,
for that?
it really did. I credit the ponies for what I call relationship 101. It taught me functional relationship skills, because ponies do not understand some of the behavior quirks that human beings produce. And in an effort to be functional with a horse, you have to produce consistent, understandable behaviors in order to promote a connection between you and the animal. And so, and those exact same skills work great with people, with other people. And so, lo and behold, I was the, what do you call it? Inability to connect socially took me to a bottom, combined with the consumption of alcohol by the middle 80s. And all of a sudden, I had a very real need to connect with a recovery group. And I had the prerequisite, and that was functional, a functional understanding of how to interact thanks to the horses. And I entered into the process of recovery, required becoming part of a group, be connecting with other people on a specific level. So
Okay.
I've become a completely different person as the result of all of these things that happened in my life.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. I want to ask about that because it sounds like, okay, not only from your childhood having some social anxiety, some issues there, due to your brother, things like that. But you got involved with the circus, something that you loved. Your art was still kind of present there. The alcoholism, getting involved with that. What did you learn from that? Like, because I think something that I've noticed from your website or wherever I read about, you always talk about how setbacks kind of make you who you are. Kind of tell me a little bit about
Uh-huh.
that.
Definitely. Yeah. See, at the beginning, alcohol provided me something that worked. It extinguished the feeling that I didn't belong. But what ends up happening is when you use something as a anesthetic to cover up something that's interfering with your forward trajectory, it doesn't keep working forever. And the years went by and I was still using this crutch the same way, expecting the same result. And it finally occurred to me that it was interfering. And I started to do some experimenting. And sure enough, I discovered that I was going to be better off without alcohol. And that's when I discovered I could not stop. I discovered that it had the physical, the chemical, whatever it is, had a grip on me. So I had to go do something about it. And that's when I found the recovery fellowship called Alcoholics Anonymous, which gave me a completely different way of living my life. It introduced a practical way of being in relationship with other people.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that experience. 'Cause I've known a few people who have been struggling alcoholics who have used Alcoholics Anonymous to to overcome it, and it seems like it's been a huge help for them. Kind of what's the is it like what we see? Because all I've ever seen is like on TV shows, someone gets up there and talks and says, "Hey, I'm Dave and I'm alcohol." But what is it that it does for you?
Well, the main thing that that I had to embrace at the beginning was something that I resisted with every ounce of my being, and that was the solution has to do with entering into relationship with others. And that's something that I resisted because of the experience I had as a child. But once I became, what do you call it, willing to enter into and become part of the group. See, I used alcohol because I didn't feel like I belonged. But when I went to the group and I humbled myself, I found a place where I belonged. And it didn't require any anesthetic. But then I ended up discovering that there were other underlying issues that had nothing to do with my consumption that occurred especially way back in childhood when my personality was developed. And that's why they have the 12 steps of recovery. And the 12 steps is really where my writing career. We talked about painting my whole life. Well, I once I showed up at AA and I started to do what they call in the program the inventory work, which is essentially writing. I experienced catharsis from taking this inventory, what I uncovered, and through the steps, and it just gave me another creative outlet. My writing at the beginning was for the sake of recovery. It evolved into marketing and entertainment, and now the books that I write are all the big idea that's hidden in all of my memoirs has to do with providing an encouraging way to consider something that's going to give you an epiphany, give the reader a payoff so that they too can experience an upgrade in the way they live their lives. And
Thank you for sharing that.
I keep writing every day, just about. I'm writing about 2 hours. I get up in the morning, I am on fire, and I'm writing every day. That's what I was doing while I was waiting for the program to start. I was working on another segment of the next book.
I love it. How many books do you have out right now?
Right now there are four, and there's number five is just days away from being available on Amazon.
Awesome. So what would you let's talk about your books for a second. What would you say is kind of the whole purpose behind it is to kind of give people the idea that there's more out there for them? Is that kind of the idea behind the books?
Encouragement. Yeah, the very first book started as a way to honor my dad and explain where my passion for the circus came from. And it's also there was tension and frustration in our home when I was a child. And then, as the result of the process of recovery, my dad and I had the ability to heal our relationship and become best friends. And so it's a boy to man homecoming type message. And every one of them, every one of the books has a different underlying message at the core so that the reader gets a payoff. And then one of my books was actually inspired by one of my customers, one of my motorcyclist customers. Today, I enjoy a route of Harley Davidson stores where I uh, one a week, and while I'm at the store, I decorate motorcycles for the customers. And one of my customers was admiring not only what I was doing, but he said, "Dave, you are living an interesting life. You travel from place to place. You do something that you enjoy. It makes people happy. You're living an interesting life. You should write a book on how to do it." So I did. So this is my next book is called Hit the Road and Thrive: 7 Secrets for Living the Dream. And in it, not only do I share stories about some of you mentioned earlier, some of the challenges that became some of the most valuable assets of my life are utilized in the book to provide encouragement for people, especially people who are maybe stuck or disgruntled or something. I want them to get the message, hey, wait a minute, there's no reason to stay stuck. As soon as your perception of what's going on changes and you realize that is a valuable asset that's going to give you an uncanny ability as you move forward into the next chapter. So it's another form of encouragement, because one of the things that we learn in the AA recovery process is that for the rest of our lives, we must remain dedicated to finding ways to be helpful to other people. So that's what fuels me as I get up every morning. Yeah.
I love that. Focusing on others, serving others is a way you do
Yeah.
that. It sounds like you do that through your art a lot. And if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing with these Harley Davidson motorcycles. So you're doing pinstriping. I guess you do a lot of motorcycle work for a lot of people, it sounds like, because you're traveling around. So you're going like to different Harley Davidson stores throughout the country and meeting with customers there and helping them with what they want on their bikes.
Yeah. All custom work. I stay on I pretty much
Okay.
stay east of the Mississippi. I spend the summer months between Philadelphia and Chicago, a different Harley store every week. And then I zigzag my way up in the spring and zigzag my way down in the fall. Right now I'm at Panama City Beach, and I'll be home at my home in Florida for the winter. And with my varied background of painting virtually everything you can think of for the circus, and then becoming a sign painter, I became a lettering man. And then for a period of 20 years, I put murals on motorhomes with the airbrush. So I painted virtually every kind of image you can think of. And then for the past 20 years, I've been chasing motorcycles. So in addition to putting pinstripe designs on motorcycles, if somebody comes along and wants some sort of an image that's never been done before, because of my extensive background and my unstoppability and my imagination, I'm able to create something that'll make them really happy with an image that will convey that particular portion of their personality or something.
Do you have any examples you could share of just maybe some of your experiences traveling to these different places and some of the people that you've met, and maybe just some things that you've come across, or maybe some designs you've done, or anything that would be fun to hear about?
Yeah, I certainly can. I've gotten to paint for some really interesting people. One lady brought me her bike, and she wanted a design painted on the front fender, one of my little intricate pinstripe designs. And while I'm painting for her, I found out that she worked for NASA, and she's the person who wrote the computer program for the space shuttle to lay over on its back during liftoff. And then there's another person that I painted on their bike, and he goes to giant corporations to meet with and train their leadership staff with a a personal one-on-one type situation, and he teaches them to utilize and employ play and you know qualities that are not typical for the corporate environment. And then there's a guy in Kentucky who was the stallion manager for Godolphin Farms. I striped his bike and he said, "Hey, Dave, you want a tour of the farm?" And I said, "Yes." So I got to go out there and take a tour of the place, and I got to meet about 5 Kentucky Derby winners. So my life is certainly colorful and exciting, and I just love traveling all over the country and getting to meet interesting people. And it wasn't always that way. It's like a complete turnaround from when I was a reclusive little kid.
That's what's amazing. I would imagine when you were that reclusive little kid that you would have never imagined your life would have turned out the way it did and the things that you would see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And today, becoming a spokesperson for others to overcome the tendency to stay limited and embrace something new. Yeah, definitely.
There was a quote that you had, I believe, on your website. I want to read it to you. That this is from you, and I just kind of want to get your thoughts on it because I thought it was beautiful. You said, "Everyone's mixture of life's challenges is divinely choreographed to help us discover our true purpose." Talk about that a little bit.
I As I look back over my career, I can't take credit for a lot of the things that happened that influenced my upward trajectory. An awful lot of those things occurred as the result of either a happy accident or a tragedy that forced me to look at it in a different way. And so even today, as I continue to mature, even though like just the recent hurricane that blew through the state of Florida, I was certainly worried about my place, and the temptation was to go to fear and worry about it and then have fantasies about losing everything and all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up realizing that was interfering with my peace and my usefulness to others. Whenever I'm wrapped up in my fear, I'm certainly not useful to other people. So I had to get off of it and stop it and refocus my attention on my priority, which is to find ways to be useful and helpful to other people. And I realized that the way to do that would, at the brink of a hurricane going over my house, would be to walk in faith that yet another episode, whatever it is that happens, there will be a positive outcome that will continue to provide me with the upward momentum that I've enjoyed throughout my entire career. It's sort of, I guess our lives are like the stock market. They go up and then they go down, and then they go up and they go down.
No doubt.
Over the long haul, it's still upward.
No doubt. It's definitely ups and downs. You hope for the most part that there's a trajectory upwards, and it typically is that way. But you brought up some great points because I think I struggle with that. I struggle with the fear and worrying about things that haven't even happened and most of the time don't even happen.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone like me who struggles with that? How do you overcome that?
You displace it. I was just talking to somebody the other day who suffers from anxiety, and I was pointing out to her that because she's trying to treat her anxiety, and I said, no, what you do is you displace anxiety and you displace it with action. And it's what we've had to learn in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't treat our alcoholism by finding something to add to the quotient. We find some way, action to take that will displace the urge, the temptation, the addiction, the tendency. And so it's the same thing with anxiety. What we want to do is find some way of displacing it. And usually it's action. It's the same thing with depression. whenever I would experience depression, I knew that was the time for me to grab a shovel and a wheelbarrow and go dig a hole. Even if I didn't need to plant a tree, it was like I needed to get my body working so that the blood would start pumping around. And then usually it would create, I don't know all about hormones and that kind of stuff, but it would create the good chemicals in your body, which would displace the thing that was providing the sensation of being depressed. So it's usually action. Take
Action.
an action. Yeah.
And I like that because I was going to ask you an example of some sort of action you could take, and you said for you it's you digging a hole, plant a tree.
Yeah.
That was one type of action. What other types of action can you do, or
I
what have you done?
There's another one because loneliness is certainly another treatable condition that occurs. And the action to take, especially in the middle of the night when you don't have access to people because everybody's asleep. You don't want to call them up in the middle of the night. But what I would do is years ago when I was on the road, all the drugstores had a postcard rack, and I would collect postcards from my travels all over the country just because it was every. I was never in the same drugstore twice, so they always had different postcards. So I started collecting postcards, and then whenever I had to treat loneliness, I'd take one of those postcards out, grab my little address book, look up somebody that I thought, hey, they'd like to get a postcard from me. And then the next thing you know, I got the address written down on the postcard. I got a little message written to them and a stamp on it. And I'm thinking of somebody else that would like to get a postcard from me. So it's yet another action that you can take to displace loneliness. What I learned is that no matter what the condition, there's a treatment for it. So
I love that.
there's always hope. Yeah.
I love that postcard example because, like you said, what it did for you, you're feeling lonely. It made you think of somebody else because you think, okay, I'm going to write to Pete or whoever, and then you made you think of Pete and what Pete would like to hear, maybe what Pete would like to know.
Uh-huh.
I love that, and that it displaced that loneliness to where you weren't as low. I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's something that I know for me personally, when I start getting frustrated or upset, it's usually because I am just thinking about myself. I'm
Yeah.
typically just woe is me, poor me. And then when I start thinking about others, it lifts that burden for sure. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's a great example. Thank you. So over the years, as you've been to all sorts of places, doing your art, doing your horsemanship, has there been any place where you're just like, wow, I'm so glad I was able to be in that place? Was there any particular place that you've traveled to that you're just like, wow, this was amazing for me?
There are lots of places where I go back to on an annual basis, and it's sort of like going home, even though I have a home.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting though, after being on the road all summer, when I get home, I actually go through grief for coming in back in off the road because I love being on the road so much. It's been such a big part of my whole life. So it's interesting that while I'm on the road, I consider that some places I go to, I consider them to be like home. And then when I get home, I go through grief for coming
For
in off the
missing
road.
your other home on the road. I love it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So, yeah. And so that's kind of a hidden theme for a book that I'm working on now. It has to do with our relationship with home and how we can, and the different experience that I've had with it. And then I want to make sure that the reader gets a valuable takeaway from that different kind of relationship with home that I've.
What does the future hold for you? What are you let me go through it all here. You've been someone in the circus, you've been a horsemanship, you've done that. You're an author, you are an artist, a very talented artist. You're also a speaker. I know you do guest speaking at things and to different groups and things like that. What else is there for
Well, I've certainly got uh, things on my bucket list. I'd like to go to uh, Portugal and be around the best horses on the planet. And there's a big circus in France where uh, 90% of the acts have horses in them. So I'd like to go see Circus sometime. I actually like railroad trains too. There's a train ride I'd like to take through the mountains of Colorado that goes up to Salt Lake City, and other kinds of things. I've got mentors that I like to pal around with, and I've got books. I got more books to write, and I still enjoy traveling around the country. So and I don't think my customers are going to let me retire. So my plan is to keep on living an interesting life.
I love it. Keep living an interesting life. All right. All of your speaking engagements, your books, tell everybody where they can find your information. If they're like, hey, I want to look at this. I want to get one of Dave's books. These are interesting. I want to learn more about Dave. Where can we find your information?
There's a whole bunch of information on a website called Letterfly.
Letterfly.com. Perfect. Excellent. So Dave, this is being an adventure podcast. You've lived an interesting life. What does adventure mean to you?
Adventure. It's going forward toward the unknown and having to not only overcome the tendency to be reluctant or maybe even fearful, but to go ahead and have the courage to trust that whatever it is that you find is going to give you a positive boost, which you would have never found if you hadn't taken that first step toward the unknown. Definitely.
Taking that first step. Love it. Dave Letterfly, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
I'm glad you had me. This is great.
Thank you so much to Dave Letterfly for coming on the show and sharing his adventures and journey with all of us. Be sure and check out his website, letterfly.com, and he can also be found on Instagram at Dave Letterfly. Thanks to all of you for listening to Journey with Jake each and every week. If you don't mind, share this episode with someone you know. Let your family and friends know about the podcast. That would mean the world to me. We have another great episode coming to you next week with Rhonda Parker Taylor. Rhonda is the author of Crossroads, which is a suspense novel, and we talk about her journey as an author and how struggling in academics is part of her path to becoming an author. Be sure and check it out next week. Just remember, it's not always about the destination, as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.